My name is Tamara Venit-Shelton. I'm a professor of history here at Claremont McKenna College and a fourth-generation Chinese American. My family emigrated from Guangdong province about 120 years ago. They went to San Francisco, and their lives, my family history, motivated my research interests in the experiences of Chinese immigrants in the United States, medical scapegoating, and discrimination. Today, in honor of the virtual National Day of Action and Healing, in honor of the efforts to stop Asian hate and mourn those we've lost, I want to share with you a short video explainer about the history of gender violence and American Orientalism. On March 16th, a gunman opened fire and killed 8 people at 3 different spas in Metro Atlanta. 6 of his victims were Asian women. As of now, police investigators are not willing to call what happened a hate crime, but observers have been quick to note that regardless of the assailants' stated motivations, the victims' race intersected with their gender and class in ways that heightened their exposure to violence. When we talk about these kinds of exposures, we often use the concepts of structural vulnerabilities, the idea that certain salient and intersecting social identities can face increased or disproportionate exposure to harm because of historically rooted, institutionally or culturally maintained notions of difference. In the case of the women murdered outside of Atlanta, working in spas made them part of a long history of Asian immigrants working in an intimate economy. The intimate economy includes domestic service, restaurants and hospitality, health and beauty therapies, and sex work, and the blurry spaces that can develop among them. Asian immigrants to the United States have occupied this niche in the labor market since the early 19th century. The reasons for that are economic and linked to histories of global labor markets and inequalities, but they're also cultural and have to do with the ways that American expectations of Asian women in particular have been conditioned by centuries of racial representations circulating in popular journalism, in literature, in plays, and various forms of visual media. American cultural perceptions have their roots in Orientalist notions of difference that date back centuries. Now, Orientalism is a concept that really developed with regard to British Empire building in the Middle East. And in the United States, it developed somewhat differently. It developed in the sort of relationship that existed between the United States and China, beginning in the 18th century and then accelerating in the 19th century. Orientalism, American Orientalism, kind of in very broad terms, conceived of Asia as culturally backwards, racially inferior, in need of colonial tutelage. And in the case of women specifically, American Orientalism propagated stereotypes of Asian women as submissive, hypersexual, and exotic. These expectations of Asian women's sexuality and sexual availability first became codified in immigration laws like the Page Act of 1875 that expressly forbid the, let's call it, importation of prostitutes, and that really targeted Chinese women. Many Chinese women in the 19th century did come to the United States under sort of terms of indentured servitude, kind of forced, coerced contracts that made them submit to sex work in this country, but not all. Yet the Page Act had the effect of casting a veil of suspicion over all women, all Chinese women who came to the United States. So regardless of their actual employment, regardless of their actual terms of immigration, they were made to be suspect and suspected of engaging in illicit prostitution. In the 20th century, American interventions in Asia only exacerbated the tendency to view women, Asian women, as sexually available. Anti-colonial wars in the Philippines, China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam were economically, socially, and environmentally devastating and left Native communities with few options for survival. Many women were compelled to turn to sex work to feed themselves and their families in places of diminishing alternatives. American servicemen stationed abroad have often solicited sex work or patronized businesses selling sexual acts, and in Asia, that tendency collided with the larger cultural project of American Orientalism. Movies, television shows, and other media memorialized Asian women as dragon ladies, sexual deviants, docile and sexually submissive war brides. Control of Asian women's bodies became a kind of metaphor for American colonial control of Asian spaces. Asian sexual submission became a way to critique an emergent American feminist movement. The women targeted in the Atlanta spa shootings were targeted because of perceptions of their sexual availability. And these perceptions are inseparable from that history of immigration, imperialism, and anti-Asian racism.